So, hello everyone. Many of you are good old friends or friends from many years and decades sometimes. I really had to go back to some files, some old presentations to get a good capture of what were we thinking back then. So hopefully some of this will resonate with you, and for those who weren't aware of it, it'll spark some ideas. The idea of compatibility shows up in the earliest of our slides talking about CWE, even back when we called it weaknesses, idiosyncrasies, flaws, and faults. We were just transitioning off that, but you know, you can see we had a compatibility program over in the left bottom. We were talking about it. We were talking about how it interacted with other parts of the program, and how this was a community of knowledge that was coming together as well as a community of efforts. And even today, you know, or later, I should say, as it grew, that became even more important as we tried to get a handle on, you know, you know, what do you call things and count and enabling metrics. So there was a little transition in, you know, where compatibility linked in, but the general idea of it was around. In fact, actually, the idea of compatibility came before there actually was a CWE program. Found this slide back from 2005, where we were talking about some new thing that we were going to do in security standards for our customers. And we talked about in software assurance and cataloging flaw types, and we were going to have a CVE compatible source code assessment tools. So the idea has always been that we wanted to identify those that were using these concepts and be able to use it beneficially. So way back, one of the first venues where we had a lot of people talking about a taxonomy of weaknesses or a collection of flaws, and we actually had a lot of, you know, reach out to say, hey, we want your help in building this. And if we're going to do that, and this is who was at the time had committed to help us, and some of these people are still with us today, you know, you're going to want to be able to recognize your stuff in that pile of stuff. So you want to be able to say, hey, my tool finds these things, or my service offers these things. So the idea of compatibility to help clarify and help organize has been there. And you know, CWE was a big cataloging effort. And you see lots of the research sources we use, but you also see some tools. And a big part of how we built CWE was we had a unilateral NDA. Basically, you know, we were promising to make use of their knowledge to build out the corpus. And of course, what was in it for them? Well, they eventually wanted to be able to point to that corpus, and for the things they covered, they wanted to be able to, you know, link to the right thing. And compatibility was one aspect of how that could happen. So the other thing that was going on is we grew. This is now 2006, and we've got more people involved. Therefore, we're going to have more people who want to point to their stuff, and we need to be able to differentiate these different people. We actually started talking about what were we trying to do with CWE. And so as you look at this, you know, we were trying to say, you know, for a developer manager, you know, what do I need to protect against at the architecture design code? Or what kind of technology risks do I have? For tool vendors, I want to know, you know, express what my tool does, but I also want to look at what I don't cover and use that as, where I should direct my efforts. And then the other part of that was, the COTS vendors. How can I, understand what I've looked for in my application? How can I communicate that to customers? Researchers are obviously, looking for areas to grow out things. How do I understand what students have been trained about? And operations managers, as I bring in product, how do I know how good it is? So CWE was looking at these kinds of scenarios, and compatibility really, speaks to some of those use cases. And so as we built out even further in the 2007 timeframe, and we were able to get SANS to actually put out one of their famous posters around CWE, the need to be able to link these different things and show how they play together and how things derived was even more apparent and imperative. We also at that time started looking through CWE, and the top here was, what tools say they find things that are in CWE, and the bottom was for things that tools say they find, how many tools find the same thing? Well, that was something no one could do before CWE, and it was also then, being able to say I was compatible, but I'm not looking for everything. I'm looking for these things and be able to clearly state that. So that was definitely part of what we were looking at in CWE, where the CWE program for compatibility had a different nuance in that area. And so the last kind of scenario we were talking about was all those different players that were involved. How do they interact? How do they understand what each one's bringing to the game? And basically, being able to tell the story amongst these players. And so that's really what drove the requirements for CWE compatibility and effectiveness, where, we wanted somebody to be able to get into the program easily so they could declare that they were gonna do it. They didn't even have to have moved the needle off of 0 to make a declaration. That wasn't the case most of the time. It was enthusiastically, yes, I'm doing it and I've already got it here and so on. We needed to be able to say that they could output something as a CWE if somebody was looking for something, a report or a tool finding, but also you wanted to be able to look through what they covered and be able to search through that by CWE. But we also then found that a lot of the information that people had in tools wasn't getting mapped very cleanly, and I would offer that may still be a problem, to CWE. So there was accuracy mapping requirements we were talking about. And then the final part was when you actually, met that, put out a questionnaire, show us how to use your tool. What we never got to, and I hope someday we can, is effectiveness. How well does some tool actually go about finding particular weaknesses, whether it be in the architecture, in the design, in the code, or in operations. And we had a plan for how we were going to do that, but that never got off the ground. It was a real technically challenging thing. And, there was all things about, how do I make sure someone doesn't fool the test or learn the test, and lots of different aspects. So those were the thoughts I had, what I remembered, and what I can actually show you. Steve and Joe and several others were around and helped drive and motivate this. So I'm glad to answer questions. My reflections didn't take as long as I was given, but obviously there's things I may have overstepped and not covered. So anyone who has questions about this, be happy to try to reminisce or explain or talk about what didn't work. So that was all I had.
Hey, Bob, I have a quick, sorry.
Yeah.
And Alex?
Yeah, quick question. In your viewpoint, Bob, you've been at this game for a long time. As you reflect back, what are the couple of things that you wish had gone differently?
Well, you know, the whole issue of CWE kind of emerged out of the fog bank of, you know, dealing with vulnerabilities. You know, Steve and I were working the CWE program, both of us software developers in background. And one day we were reflecting that, you know, why on God's green earth is the number of CVEs continuously going up? You know, why aren't people getting the message and, you know, dealing with these things? And we were staring at a chart of, you know, the number of CVEs being issued by type, because that was one of the things we used to differentiate between different reported things to try to, you know, get narrowed in on something. And, you know, the fact that so many people were starting to catalog these, what we now call weaknesses, before we got CWE out there. And the fact that we reused words and concepts, it really, from the beginning, I wish it was more accuracy and more, you know, clarity between the different issues. But I think, you know, we were stuck in a place where there was a body of work amongst many, many players that we wanted to bring together so that we didn't just start from scratch. And that brought in a lot of, you know, kitchen sinks and tubs and other, you know, vessels. And we just never had the resources to clean that up. And then, you know, there's been many attempts to kind of retrospectively look at it and clean it up. But while very strongly based on science and engineering thinking, it never resulted in funding to CWE to actually implement those changes and get that, you know, refactored. Because you can't really say, oh, well, we're going to throw out CWEs and start anew, because there's so many connections in tools and policy and teaching. But we can get much more clean about what do those things mean? What are the things you can, you know, kind of derive or imply from that? And now it's kind of a little fuzzy. Sometimes it's very pristine, very clean, but other times it's not. So that's one of my regrets, is that we never had the resources to really clean that up so that it wouldn't continue to be a gnawing, you know, kind of instability in the ecosystem of software development quality in this area. Steve, you have any regrets in the compatibility area?
Well, we only have the day, I like that you mentioned the kitchen sink approach, because that's what we called it, especially in the early days. We really took together, you know, that massive set of a lot of different taxonomies and tool results and sort of tossed them all together into what I call the, you know, the kitchen sink, under the expectation and belief that we could clean all of that up over time. And we've been able to make some substantive efforts at different points in time, especially in the past few years. We've been able to make some more dedicated efforts. And so I think things are a lot cleaner now, certainly, than they were in the beginning. But I do share your regret at this, that we were not able to put as much time and effort into really cleaning and more systematically reorganizing CWE to make it more usable and minimize issues such as duplicates and so on. So I share the regret.
Yeah, I also, wish we had understood, the problem with reusing words that already had meanings to the people. We spent 2 years trying to refactor the names to get away from that, resulting in very long weakness names. But if people already have multiple meanings for a word, we basically learned you couldn't use that word to label something, because someone's gonna have the wrong understanding, and people don't want to go read the whole description or look at the architecture of that flaw and understand its nuances. They just want a name that they can go to town with.
Yeah, and I think that effort has worked well in terms of us trying to be self-consistent, but that's also sometimes forced us to choose words or terms that no one necessarily has a real shared understanding of, unless they learn the CWE lingo, and unless they study some of the theoretical underpinnings of vulnerability theory, which is trying to help lay out CWE side of things. But that's a really big ask, especially for you're a developer or somebody and you just have one issue that you want to map to CWE. So there is I think that does pose a little bit of a usability or onboarding challenge that occurs. Another regret, actually, Bob, comes to mind with me, and I wouldn't call it a regret, but looking back, I don't feel that we understood how different all of the different code analysis tools were.
Yeah,
I don't think we understood how differently many people looked at things, and that understanding has taken a while to really take shape. We started this before comparative analyses were really being done on a systematic level.
Yeah, that's almost a superset of the elephant game. So anyone else have something they wanted to bring up?
Well, just in response to what Steve was saying, Steve, you should be wearing your CWE decoder ring. So
I lost.
I've got a badge around here somewhere.
But these are good reflections. I think, when you're building something from ground up, it's kind of hard to kind of think of every possible scenario, every possible use case. And the reflections are good to really kind of level set where we were and where we need to go. So I truly, when, starting thinking about, what will make for a successful day and really moving this conversation forward about, improving CWE and the CWE Compatibility Program, I thought it made sense to really hear from, the two originators who were very instrumental in informing and formalizing CWE, to hear some of the initial thoughts on how it got started and really kind of share their experiences, but to really hear now some of I don't want to use regrets, but I think it's important to kind of at least capture that in the back of our minds, because I think it sets the tone for or at least kind of amplify how much the industry has moved forward, how much state of practice has changed and the state of the art has changed, but just fundamental modern software development. So many changes have been made over the last decade, and it's really hard to kind of capture that. So here we are today, really trying to understand where we need to go and need to take the program and improve.
Right, but one thing I think has always been true and continues to be true, it's a community effort.
Absolutely.
That this is, something that it's not, Miter off in the corner came up with this idea. It was the market, it was the people we were working with in industry in the CVE world that said, hey, we need to get left, as they now call it. And, they all said, hey, and I've got material that can help you. And so we had like 18 unilateral NDAs. So that kitchen sink was pretty big. It had a lot of stuff in it. And, there was a tough job wading through it to find like things and match them. And we had a little technology help in some of that, but was not quite up to the job that it was facing.
No, it's great. And I want to thank you both for sharing those reflections. And I want to transition into the next session.